Cape Town has sworn in Geordin Hill-Lewis as its executive mayor during an inaugural council meeting sitting today. He won by 141 votes. The ANC's Thandie Makasi got 46 votes. The city of Cape Town is one of three metros which has been won without an outright majority. The DA will govern the city of Cape Town, although with a reduced majority compared to the previous election. Meanwhile, the ANC's desire to lead Maluti-A-Phofung municipality in the Free State is doomed. Coalition talks from opposition parties have successfully endorsed mayorship and the speaker to be from 16 civic movement. We're now joined via Zoom by political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze. Very good afternoon to you, Prof. It's always a pleasure to see you here on SABC News, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Prof, what's been your assessment thus far of, we're talking a lot about coalition talks at the moment, the talks, the discussions, and more importantly, parties refusing even to entertain some parties in those negotiations, but then slowly having to kind of humble themselves in some ways. What are your thoughts in totality of what's going on in the political landscape here in South Africa?
Well, I think when it comes to the negotiations for the coalitions, it's typically how negotiations work. It's never a sort of a clean, straightforward process. It's about bargaining. It's about putting together different options. It's about forming alliances within negotiations. All of that. So the negotiations that we are seeing are very typical of it. It's not anything to be concerned about. The fact that some parties have put up some reservations about other parties, that they don't want to talk with them. I think in negotiations are always having some risk, because in some instances, right at the last moment, if your own options as a party didn't materialize, then you might have to go back to some of those points and say, well, look at new alternatives. And in order to justify that in public, if you've made these announcements in public, will be quite difficult to justify.
And quite interestingly, we heard Action SA's Herman Mashaba questioning the IFP over their ANC coalition, what he's called the backtrack. Herman could be in a good position if he perhaps did cooperate with the ANC. Does this perhaps show him that other parties are kind of looking out for themselves, and he could be forced to follow suit? As you say, this is all about bargaining. He's made it very clear that he's not going to speak to the EFF and ANC. Might he also have to renege on what he initially had said, and that's why he's pointing out so much what the IFP have now done?
Yes, that's indeed what I have in mind. And we've seen it even in 2016. In the end, for example, in a place like Tabazimbi, the EFF, who didn't want to be part in any coalition, actually joined the coalition government there. So I expect that we are going to, in about 5 days' time, when the final deadline emerges, that we might see sort of last-minute deals between parties that excluded each other. Because the alternative is then that if they can't reach an agreement, they must go back for 3 elections. And although many are saying, well, this is a scare that President Ramaphosa especially has presented or put on the table, it exists. It's not theoretical. It's not an hypothetical idea. And it has been used in the past in a number of times.
Yeah.
So it's not something that they can completely disregard and they have to take into account. It becomes 2 options: either negotiate and reach an agreement, or have a free run of the elections.
Yeah. Prof, meanwhile, in the Western Cape, we see the DA's Geordin Hill-Lewis being sworn in as Cape Town mayor. What awaits Mr. Lewis? I'm asking this in relation to the fact that he goes in really with a weaker DA, not as strong as they would have been before. And then we also on the back of that also have a situation where in the Western Cape, smaller parties like the PA and ICOSA are reaping the benefits of entering into coalitions with the ANC in the Western Cape's rural municipalities. In total, what is what are your thoughts really on the political landscape in the Western Cape at the moment, and what this then says for us going for 2024 elections?
Well, to start with Cape Town, yes, it is absolutely correct that the DA has less support there. But if you look at the parties that follow, it is almost a fragmented landscape of opposition parties. All of them are very far below the DA. So though they are not in the 60s anymore, and they have lost support. The opposition also fragmented. So it's not as if there's a direct threat to the DA's position in Cape Town itself. If we look at the smaller towns in the Karoo, in the interior of the Western Cape and the West Coast, and especially the Southern Cape also, what we've seen is more of a proliferation of coalition parties and coalition governments. While in 2016 there were about 8, there's now more than 16 hung councils and ultimately coalition governments that must be formed, which means that the dominance of the DA and the ANC in some areas have become less pronounced. And the need for coalitions have become more important. At the same time, what we've seen in many of these councils is the emergence of local groups, especially in the Karoo areas, ICOSA, but also the Karoo Gemeenskapsorganisasie and others, who have been quite instrumental in the formation of coalition government. So that's a completely different political dynamics than what we are seeing in the metropolitan areas like Cape Town or even in other parts of the country.
Prof, just in closing, I mean, this fragmentation that you speak of, what can it then be attributed to? Is it really a case of voter turnout? We know that voter turnout was quite low. Is that really the main reason, or is it the fact that, you know, we're also finding a situation where there are smaller parties emerging, and then we're also going to start to see the independents? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what this fragmentation can really be sort of attributed to.
Yes, it's not linked to the voter turnout, because the voter turnout in, for example, 1995 and in 2000 and 2011 were exactly the same as what they were, a little bit more than what it has been this year. So what we are actually seeing is fragmentation around identity issues, around, for example, especially in the Western Cape, around so-called coloured politics, the emergence of parties like the Good Party, like the Patriotic Alliance, the concerned Congress, Cape Congress, the movement for so-called independence or more self-determination in the Western Cape, and all sorts of issues. It's really becoming a plurality of political issues that were sort of established around the new political parties. Independents, they didn't play a very significant role in this election. 51 were elected in wards all over the country, but there's almost 10,000 candidates or positions that were elected. So it's less than 1% of the total. And for the 2024 election, what the relevance of that is, we will have to work out still, but it looks as if yes, there's a strong sentiment for independent candidates or representatives, but it didn't materialize, or it does not materialize when it comes to elections themselves.
All right. Prof, always a pleasure having you here on SABC News. Thank you very much for being with us and giving us your time, sir.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon.
Right. That is a political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze, weighing in, of course, on the issue of coalitions. And, of course, time is indeed running out for the political parties to make those decisions. Some indeed have, in fact, been made by now. We saw that in KZN, the IFP changing the view on working with the ANC, and also you start to perhaps see more of that, as Prof. Kotze alludes.